James was shot down by the Red Baron. Brined enemy lines. Oh my goodness. Will he live?
James only wanted to fly an airplane. In 1917, that was the most exciting thing a young man could dream of. But dreams have a way of meeting reality, and reality met James hard. He found himself falling from the sky into a world that felt nothing like home. 1918 Germany was cold, hungry, suspicious. A far cry from the warm fields of East Texas. He thought he was going to die there, alone, unseen, forgotten, but he wasn't. And what happened next is a story worth hearing. Before we begin, I'd love to know what part of this beautiful world your home is in. Share it in the comments. It helps me feel connected to you. Now the story begins. The rain had been falling for 3 straight days, turning the French airfield into a swamp of mud, oil, and cigarette smoke. Canvas tents flapped in the wind like tired flags. Mechanics cursed in 3 different languages. Engines coughed, sputtered, and roared as if they were alive and angry. And into this chaos stepped Second Lieutenant James Carter, 21 years old, boots still clean, uniform still crisp, eyes still full of the kind of hope that veterans found painful to look at. He clutched his duffel bag and looked around, trying to figure out where to report. No one paid him any attention. Men hurried past him with tools, ammunition crates, and bandaged arms. A stretcher team jogged by carrying a pilot whose goggles were still fused his face with dried blood. James swallowed hard. This wasn't the heroic adventure he'd imagined. A French sergeant finally noticed him and jerked a thumb toward a long wooden hut near the flight line. Briefing. That was all he said. James nodded and stepped inside. The room fell silent for a moment, not because they cared he'd arrived, but because they were counting. One more new face. One more boy who wouldn't last a week. At the front of the room stood Captain Armand Delacroix, the squadron commander. Tall, sharp-featured, uniform immaculate despite the mud outside. He didn't look at James. He didn't even look up from the map. He simply said in a flat, practiced voice, "Do not unpack your bags." James blinked. "Sir." Delacroix finally raised his eyes. They were cold, exhausted, and old, far older than the man wearing them. "You won't be here past Sunday." A few of the veterans smirked darkly. One shook his head as if to say, "Don't take it personally, kid." "Excuse me." James asked, "You won't live." Delacroix exclaimed. James felt his stomach twist, but he stood straighter. "I'll do my best, sir." Delacroix gave a humorless half-smile. "They all say that." He tapped the map with a pointer. "Your first patrol is in 1 hour. Stay with your flight leader. Do not chase anything alone. And if you find yourself alone," he paused. The room went still. "You turn around and go home. If you try to fight alone, you will die." James nodded, though his throat was dry. Delacroix dismissed the room with a wave. Pilots filed out, some patting James on the shoulder as they passed. Not encouragement, just ritual. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking open, revealing a pale morning sky. James walked toward his aircraft, a patched-up Newport with bullet holes still visible in the wings. A mechanic tightened the last bolt and stepped back. "You're the new one," the mechanic said in accented English. "Try not to crash it. We just fixed her." James forced a smile. James had barely stepped away from the briefing hut when a tall American pilot, with grease-stained gloves and a crooked grin, walked up to him. "First day, huh?" the man said. James nodded. The pilot reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick cigar, the kind that looked like it belonged to the general's desk drawer, not an airfield. He pressed it into James's hand. "Don't smoke it till you land here again," he said. "That's the rule." James tried to laugh, but it came out thin, superstitious, alive. The man replied and walked off toward his plane. An hour later, James was in formation with 5 escort fighters and 2 lumbering triplane bombers. The morning sky had cleared, leaving a pale blue canvas stretching endlessly above them. The mission was simple on paper. Escort the bombers, keep them safe, bring everyone home. He climbed into the cockpit, heart pounding, hands trembling as he adjusted the straps. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. He looked down the runway, a muddy strip leading straight into the unknown. Behind him, Captain Delacroix watched with arms crossed, expression unreadable. Another new pilot, another dead man walking. James pushed the throttle forward. The plane lurched, bounced, and lifted into the sky. For the first 20 minutes, everything went smoothly. The bombers droned along, steady and slow, while the escort scanned the sky. James began to think maybe, just maybe, he'd make it back to smoke that cigar. Then the sun disappeared behind shadows. Not clouds, planes. A dozen German fighters dropped out of the sky like hawks diving on rabbits. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. His leader pointed up. The formation shattered. James watched in horror as his flight leader's plane took a burst of fire and erupted in flames. Bright, sudden, terrifying. The aircraft spiraled downward, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. James froze for half a heartbeat. Then he saw it. A red plane. Not just red,
14.
Painted red, bold as blood against the sky. It slid in behind him with impossible grace, as if the pilot had been waiting for him specifically. James yanked the stick lift. The red plane followed. He rolled right. It stayed glued to him. He climbed, engine straining. The red plane climbed with him. Inch for inch, he dove, wind screaming past the wires. Still there, no matter what he did. The German pilot stayed locked on his tail. Patient, precise, almost calm. James's breath came fast. His gloves were slick with sweat. Then the German fired. A short burst, not a spray, a surgeon's touch. James's engine coughed once, twice, then belched a thick cloud of white oil smoke. It poured into the cockpit, choking him, burning his eyes. He couldn't see. He couldn't breathe. He was flying blind. Come on, come on. He gasped, trying to keep the wings level. He spotted a field through the smoke, or thought he did, and aimed for it, but he was too low. The wheels hit the ground hard. The plane bounced. Then the left wing dug into the earth. The world flipped. James felt himself thrown free, tumbling across the grass until he came to a stop on his back under low-hanging limbs of an oak tree. Staring at the sky that spun above him, he coughed,
14.
trying to clear the smoke from his lungs. Then he heard the engine of the red plane. It swooped low over the wreckage of his fighter. James rolled onto his stomach just in time to see the German pilot fire a controlled burst, tearing his plane apart piece by piece until it was nothing but splintered wood and twisted canvas. Then the red plane climbed, banked gracefully, and disappeared into clouds. James lay in the grass, dazed, bruised, and alone, deep in enemy territory, with no idea where he was or how he would survive the night. He realized his pants were wet, his face was wet, and he was shaking so hard he couldn't stop it. Shock, cold, fear, all of it hit him at once. He crawled deeper under the fallen tree, pressing himself into shadows as if he could disappear into the roots. For a long moment, he just lay there listening. Nothing. No engines. No shouting. No boots pounding across the field. Just the wind moving through the grass and the faint ticking of cooling metal from the wreck behind him. He forced himself to look up. The sky was a perfect, peaceful blue, the kind of sky that made the world look safe. No German plane circling. No French or American aircraft searching for him. Just emptiness. He wiped his face with a trembling hand and tried to think. Where am I? He knew the basics. The sun set in the west, rose in the east, and rode the southern sky. But none of that helped him now. He was somewhere behind German lines. Deep behind them, for all he knew. To get back to the French line, he'd have to go through the German line. That wasn't a plan. That was suicide. He sat there, breathing hard, trying to steady himself. He needed direction. He needed a chance. He needed anything that wasn't panic. Then it came to him. North. Not because he knew what was there. Not because it was safe. But because it was something, a direction, a decision, a way to keep moving instead of freezing in fear. He whispered it aloud, as if saying it made it real. North. I'll go north. He crawled out from under the tree, legs still shaking, and stood. The field stretched out before him, quiet and open. Too open. He'd have to move fast, stay low, and pray no one had seen the crash. He took one last look at the smoking remains of his plane. The plane he'd barely known. The plane he'd never get to fly again. Then he turned his back on it and started walking north. He was exhausted, hungry, thirsty, and scared in a way he'd never known. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow looked like a soldier. He kept turning in circles, watching every direction at once, as if danger could come from the sky, the trees, or the ground beneath him. A dog suddenly burst across the field, chasing something unseen. James flinched so hard he nearly fell over, heart hammering. For a split second, he thought the dog had a rifle slung over its back. Then he realized what he'd done and let out a shaky laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from relief and nerves tangled together. But the moment didn't last. Engines, low, distant, growing. He froze, eyes scanning the horizon. They're tiny specks at first, then shapes. Aircraft, a whole flight of them. German, his breath caught. 50 feet away, a hedgerow. He sprinted, legs wobbling, and dug beneath the tangled branches just as the fighters roared overhead. He pressed himself into the dirt, barely daring to breathe. The planes passed above him, sunlight flashing through their wings, then vanished into the distance. He stayed still long after they were gone, listening, waiting, making sure no one had seen him. Finally, he crawled out and kept moving north, staying close to a narrow dirt road. It felt safer to have something to follow, even if it was dangerous. Then he heard it, marching. Boots, dozens of them. A company of German soldiers came into view, rifles slung, helmets catching the last of the daylight. They were heading straight toward him. No trees, no ditch, no barn, nowhere to go. He dropped flat into the tall grass, pressing his face into the earth. The stalks swayed above him, hiding him barely. The soldiers marched past, row after row, their boots thudding like a drumbeat. One wrong move, one sneeze, one twitch, and it would be over. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. And then pain. Sharp, burning, crawling pain. Ants. He laid right in the middle of an ant bed. Stupid, he told himself, biting down on his sleeve to keep from yelping. Stupid, stupid, but he stayed still. He had to. It felt like an eternity before the last soldier passed, and the sound of marching faded into the distance. Only then did he roll away from the ant bed, panting, brushing at his clothes, trying to shake off the stinging bites. The sun was sinking now, turning the sky gold and purple. The air was cooling fast, and the shadows were stretching long across the fields. Night was coming, and he had nowhere to go. His skin was burning from the ant bites, and a dizzy wave washed over him every few steps. He felt hollow, exhausted, hungry, thirsty, and scared in a way that made his thoughts blur at the edges. He drifted toward the road because the ground was smoother there. Walking in the middle felt wrong, exposed, but it was easier than stumbling through fields and brush. So he walked, and walked, and walked. Hours passed. He saw no one. He heard nothing. But he felt everything. The ache in his legs, the dryness in his throat, the cold creeping into his bones. Then, through the fading light, he saw it. A barn. Just a shape at first, a darker block against the dimming sky. But it was real, solid, shelter. His teeth were chattering now, each breath a shiver. He moved slowly, carefully, keeping low as he approached. No voices, no lantern light, no barking dogs. He slipped inside to the door, the hinges groaning softly. Warmth hit him immediately, not heat, but the gentle warmth of animals and stored hay. The smell of straw, dust, and old wood wrapped around him like a blanket. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just crawled into the hay. It felt soft, safe, almost like a bed, letting the warmth seep into his frozen fingers. His eyes closed on their own. Sleep didn't creep in. It crashed over him. And for the first time since the crash, he felt something close to peace. Morning light crept into barn, thin and gray. James woke to the sound of someone moving nearby, slow, steady footsteps on wooden planks. He held his breath. The farmer. James could hear him working, the scrape of a pitchfork as he mucked out a stall. Every time the tine struck the ground, James imagined him driving straight through his ribs. He stayed perfectly still, buried in the hay, barely daring to blink. The farmer never saw him. A few minutes later, the barn door creaked again. Softer footsteps this time, the farmer's wife. She murmured something in German. She had gathered eggs and set the basket gently on the ground before walking away. James waited until the door closed. Then he moved. Quick, silent, desperate. He snatched 4 eggs, tucked them against his chest, and slipped out of the barn. He ran until he reached the ditch beside the road, then dropped to his stomach and spun so he could swallow the eggs raw, one after another. They weren't pleasant, but they were food, the first he'd had since before the crash. Still, no one saw him. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pushed himself up, north. He had to keep going north. He continued along the road until a cattle pond came into view, a shallow pool of muddy water behind a hedgerow. Thirst overruled caution. He crawled through the hedge, belly to the ground, and lowered his face to drink. The water felt cool to his throat, then movement in the water stopped him cold. Snakes. More than one. He froze, watching them glide just beneath the surface. Slowly, carefully, he backed away, heart pounding. He hadn't thought about snakes. He hadn't thought about anything except water. He crawled out of the hedge and stood, brushing dirt from his sleeves. His throat still burned with thirst, but he couldn't risk that pond. So he walked. All day. The sun climbed, then fell. His legs ached. His stomach twisted with hunger. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then he saw a field, long rows of potato plants, stretching across the soil. He hesitated only a moment before easing into the field. Crouching low, he dug with his hands, pulling up a few small potatoes and stuffing them into his pockets. He ate one raw as he walked. It tasted like dirt and bitterness. His stomach churned, but he kept going. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was something, enough to keep him moving. The sky was turning orange now. The air was cooling again. Shadows stretched long across the fields. He was alone, exhausted, and still deep behind enemy lines. But he was alive, and he was still heading north. James walked until the darkness swallowed everything. With no moon and no strength left, he crawled into a hedge, curled into himself, and drifted into a thin, uneasy sleep. He woke to the thunder of engines. Trucks growled down the road. Boots pounded the earth. Then came the grinding roar of a heavy tank. So close the ground trembled beneath him. James pressed himself deeper into the brush, hardly daring to breathe. A soldier stopped just beyond his hiding place and relieved himself. The sound impossibly loud in the still morning air. James waited for the shout, the rifle, the end. It never came. The column moved on, the rumble fading into the distance. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. He needed food, water, anything, in the growing light. He finally saw what the night had hidden. A farmhouse sitting alone about half a mile ahead. James rolled onto his knees and whispered a thank you to his Father in heaven. He wasn't dead. Not yet. And as long as he was breathing, he had to keep moving. Something jabbed his knee. He reached down and picked up a small stone, smooth on one side, sharp on the other. He struck it against a larger rock beside him. A spark jumped. He tried again. Another spark. A flicker of possibilities stirred in his chest. I can make a fire with this, he murmured, but only if he was careful. Smoke could betray him faster than any soldier. He pocketed both stones and eased out toward the road, keeping low, listening for engines or voices. The farmhouse ahead sat quiet in the morning light. A half-mile, maybe less. Close enough to tempt him, far enough to feel like a gamble. Chickens, he thought. A place like that has to have chickens. If he could steal one, maybe he could cook it. Maybe he could eat something warm for the first time in days. He swallowed hard and started forward. Nobody was in sight. The house was old, built of weathered stone, its windows dark and still. Behind it sat a sturdy chicken pen, the fencing straight and well kept. Inside, white hens milled about, pecking at the ground. If he could get in and out quietly, he might finally eat something real. James crept forward, keeping low, scanning the yard for any sign of movement. Still nothing. No voices. No dogs. No doors opening. He reached the pen, opened the gate as slowly as he could, and winced as the hinges gave a soft creak. The chickens stirred, clucking in irritation. He slipped inside, grabbed a small hen with both hands, and turned to leave and found himself staring straight into the twin barrels of a shotgun leveled at his face. The farmer yelled something sharp and fast in German. James didn't understand a single word, but the meaning was clear enough. He dropped the chicken immediately and raised both hands high, fingers spread, showing he had nothing, showing he meant no harm. The farmer stepped closer, the twin barrels of the shotgun tracking every inch James moved. His voice rose again. Another burst of German, angry, frightened, commanding. James swallowed hard. "I'm not fighting," he said softly, though he knew the farmer couldn't understand him. Slowly, painfully slowly, he took one step backward toward the open door of the chicken pen. He kept his hands up, palms out, moving with the careful, deliberate motions of a man trying not to startle a wild animal. The farmer followed each movement with the muzzle of the shotgun, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. He was a man protecting his home, his animals, his wife. And now he'd found a stranger on his land wearing the wrong uniform. James kept moving, inch by inch, until he reached the doorway. He paused, waiting, letting the farmer see he wasn't running, wasn't resisting, wasn't a threat. The farmer barked another command, shorter this time, less furious, more uncertain. James nodded, though he didn't know what he was agreeing to. He just wanted the farmer to see he understood the situation. The man with the shotgun was in charge. He stepped out into the yard, hands still raised, breath shaking in his chest. He expected to be tied up, locked away, maybe even thrown into a cage. A cold wave of dread washed through him. A woman's voice spoke behind him. Firm, steady, not frightened at all. James turned his head just enough to see her. She looked older than him by 20 years, maybe more, with the same kind of calm strength his own mother had. Her hair was pulled back, her apron dusted with flour. She didn't look afraid of him. She looked concerned. She and the farmer began talking rapidly in German. James couldn't understand the words, but the tone told him everything. They were arguing about him. The farmer's voice was sharp, angry, protective. The woman's voice was softer but unyielding. She wasn't backing down. Suddenly the farmer snapped something loud, turning toward James and waving the shotgun. "Gay!" he barked. James flinched. At first he didn't understand. Then it clicked. He pointed toward the farmhouse. "You want me to go that way?" The farmer jabbed the shotgun in the same direction. "Gay! Go!" Before James could move, the woman stepped forward and reached out, taking him gently by the sleeve of his shirt. "Come my tea, Junge," she said softly. "Come with me, boy." Her touch wasn't rough. It wasn't fearful. It was guiding, almost motherly. The farmer's eyes widened. He raised his voice at her, panic breaking through his anger. "Geh nix so nah. Kann ich dir waitin'. Don't get so close. He could hurt you." She turned her head and gave him a look James didn't need a translation for. The universal expression every wife has given every husband since the beginning of time. Something between, "Oh, nonsense," and "stop being ridiculous." In 1918 German, the closest natural expression would be, "Es ist Unsinn." "Oh, nonsense." She kept her hand on James's sleeve, steady and sure, and gently pulled him toward the house. The farmer lowered the shotgun a fraction, not because he trusted James, but because he trusted her. And for the first time since the crash, James felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. She led him toward the house, her grip tightening as they climbed the steps, almost pulling him along. James stumbled once, his legs still weak, but she didn't slow. She was determined, and he didn't dare resist. Behind them, the farmer followed, still speaking loudly in German. His voice was sharp, anxious, and when he misstepped on the top stair, he nearly fell. For a split second, James thought the shotgun might go off by accident. His heart thumped hard in his chest as he stepped into the kitchen. The woman finally released his shirt and moved around him with purpose. She pulled out a wooden chair from the table, turned it toward him, and said firmly, "Setz dich. Sit." James sat immediately. The farmer stood in the doorway, lowering the shotgun but keeping it cradled in his arms, not pointed at James anymore, but not put away either. His eyes never left the young American. The room was warm. It smelled of bread with smoke and something cooking in a pot. After days of cold, fear, and hunger, the simple warmth of the kitchen felt unreal. James sat still, hands on his knees, waiting, unsure what would happen next. But for the first time since the crash, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't alone in the dark. He was in a kitchen, a real kitchen, with a woman who reminded him of home, and a farmer who didn't quite know what to do with him. And somehow, despite the shotgun and the fear and the language he couldn't understand, he felt safer than he had in days. The wife pointed at herself and said, clearly and slowly, "Ich bin Anna. I am Anna." Then she pointed toward her husband, who still stood in the doorway with the shotgun tucked in his arms. "Das ist Herr Bauer. This is Mr. Bauer." Finally, she pointed at James. Her voice softened, her expression gentle but curious. "We heist du. What is your name?" James swallowed, touched his chest lightly, and answered, "James." Anna nodded, repeating it carefully, testing the foreign sound. "Skems." The farmer grunted, not quite approving, not quite disapproving, just taking the name of the stranger now sitting in his kitchen. And for the first time, James felt like a person to them, not just a threat. Anna moved to the stove, lifted the lid from a large iron pot, and a wave of warm, rich aroma filled the kitchen. She dipped a ladle into the stew, poured a generous portion into a wooden bowl, and set a spoon inside it. Then she placed the bowl in front of James. "ISS, eat." The smell hit him first, meat, potatoes, onions, herbs, the kind of smell that made his empty stomach twist and ache. He hadn't smelled real food in days. James looked up at her Bauer, unsure, almost asking permission with his eyes. The farmer held his gaze for a long moment. Then he gave a single, stiff nod. James picked up the spoon. The first bite nearly made him close his eyes. It was warm, hearty, comforting. Everything he'd been missing since the crash. He ate slowly at first, then faster, unable to help himself. It was so good. Anna watched him with quiet satisfaction. Her Bauer watched him with guarded suspicion. But James felt something he hadn't felt since the morning of a mission. Human again. Her Bauer finally stepped away from the doorway and sat at the table, still holding the shotgun across his lap. He said something to Anna, short, low, and clearly not a request. Anna shook her head, without another word. She ladled stew into a bowl and set it firmly in front of him. Then she filled another bowl for herself and placed it at her seat. She picked up James's empty bowl, carried it back to the pot, and filled it again, this time with a smaller portion. She set it gently in front of him, as if to say, "You're still a guest, but we don't know you yet." Her Bauer muttered something under his breath. Anna sat down, folded her arms, and gave him a look that needed no translation. Whatever he had said, she wasn't budging. Her Bauer sighed, lowered his head, and began speaking in German, slow, steady, reverent. James didn't understand a single word, but he recognized the rhythm, the tone, the quiet sincerity. A prayer. He bowed his head out of respect. When the farmer finished, the room felt different. Not safe, not yet, but calmer. The kind of calm that comes when people sit at a table together, instead of standing on opposite sides of fear. James lifted his spoon again. The stew tasted even better the second time. Nothing was said during the meal. When Anna began collecting the empty bowls, her Bauer finally looked directly at James. His brow tightened, and he spoke in German, slow, pointed, demanding. "Was magst du here? What are you doing here?" James stared back, confused. He didn't understand a single word. He lifted his hand slightly and shrugged. A silent, "I don't know what you're saying." Her Bauer grumbled, shaking his head. "Der Junge versus Michigan nicht. The boy doesn't understand me." Anna set the bowls aside and answered calmly. "Du weißt, worum hearest. Ist ein Krieger." You know why he's here. He's a warrior. Her Bauer snorted. Ja. Is here, unser Jungen zu töten." Yes. He's here killing our boys." Anna didn't flinch. "Naderlich, waren unser Jungen ihr Jungen töten." Of course he is, while our boys are killing their boys. Her Bauer's voice cracked, anger and grief tangled together. "Wie alt ist der Dirgenage, der unseren Sohn gerettet hat? He may be the one who killed our son, Anna turned sharply toward him. Neen. Nicht dieser. No, not this one. She pointed at James's trousers. The dark stain he hadn't noticed until now. Hat niemanden gettet. Sie dir sein Hosen. He hasn't killed anyone. Look at his pants. Her Bauer looked, really looked. James followed his gaze, and only then realized what they saw. The fear, the humiliation, the evidence that he was not a hardened killer, not a threat, not a monster, just a terrified young man who had nearly died. Heat rushed to James's face. Shame, embarrassment. He felt small, weak, exposed like a coward. But Anna's expression softened, and her Bauer's anger shifted. Not gone, not forgiven, but shaken. For the first time, he saw James not as an enemy, but as a boy. Her Bauer let out a short, tired chuckle and shook his head. Heiress in Jacob's altar. Nach ein Junge. He's Jacob's age. Still a boy. Anna nodded softly. Ja. Yes. Her Bauer's eyes stayed on James, studying him. Not with anger now, but with something closer to sorrow. Kann wir ihm trauen? Can we trust him? Anna hesitated. Ich weiß es nicht. I don't know. Her Bauer exhaled slowly, the weight of years settling on his shoulders. His voice dropped, quieter, almost defeated. Lass es I unseren Sohn setzen, durch Dyson here. Let them replace our son with this one. Anna turned toward him. For a moment she simply looked at her husband. Really looked. Seeing the grief behind the words, the longing, the ache that had never healed. Then she nodded, not out of certainty, not out of logic, but out of the simple truth that this frightened boy at their table was no threat, and that their hearts had room for one more. Her Bauer leaned forward, resting the shotgun across his knees. He pointed at James and spoke in slow, deliberate German, his tone more instructional than threatening. Du, Junge, du musst sprechen lernen. Ich bringe es dir bei wie einem Hund. You, boy, you need to learn how to speak. I'll teach you like I teach a dog. He tapped the table once with his finger. Ein Befehl nach dem anderen. One command at a time. James didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. The farmer was trying to communicate, trying to teach him something. That alone was a miracle. Anna picked up the wooden bowl James had eaten from. She held it up where he could see it. Schussel, she said clearly. Bowl. Then she repeated it, slower. Schussel. James looked at her, then at the bowl, and repeated carefully. Schussel. Anna smiled, small but real. Her Bauer nodded once, approving. Ja. Schussel. Yes. Bowl. It wasn't much. Just a word. Just a beginning. But for James, exhausted, frightened, alone in a foreign land, it felt like the first step toward being understood, and maybe toward belonging. Her Bauer huffed, shaking his head as if the whole situation were a burden he hadn't asked for. Ich hab jetzt keine Zeit, diesen Hund zu trainieren. Ich hab Arbeit. I don't have time to train this dog right now. I have work to do. Anna shot him a sharp look. Ist kein Hund. Ist ein Junge. English. Aber trotzdem ein Junge. He's not a dog. He's a boy. English, but still a boy. Her Bauer reached out and tapped James's uniform sleeve with 2 fingers. Neen. Nicht English. Dieser hier ist Amerikaner. No, not English. This one is American. Anna shrugged, unbothered. Gut. Amerikaner. Trotzdem kein Hund. Fine. American. Still not a dog. Her Bauer grumbled something under his breath, but the edge in his voice was gone. The anger had drained away, replaced by resignation. And something else. Something like reluctant responsibility. James watched them both, understanding none of the words but all of the meaning. They weren't deciding whether to kill him. They were deciding what to do with him. And that alone felt like a miracle. Her Bauer looked at James with a weary, conflicted expression. Ich kann dir nicht trauen. Ich hab jetzt keine Zeit für dich. I can't trust you, and I don't have time for you now. He stood and said something to Anna, short, firm, resigned. She nodded once, left the kitchen, and returned a moment later with a length of rope coiled in her hands. Her Bauer motioned toward the door. James understood. He rose slowly, hands visible, and walked outside with them. The air was cool, the yard quiet except for the distant clucking of hens. They crossed to a small wooden shed near the edge of the property. James hesitated only a moment before stepping inside on his own. Anna followed him in. Her face wasn't hard or angry, just sad, practical, apologetic. She gently took his wrists and tied them together. Not harshly, not painfully, but securely. Then she motioned downward. He sat. She tied his ankles, necks, her hands steady, her voice soft. "Wir können dir einfach nicht trauen. Knock nicked. We just can't trust you. Not yet." She looked up at him, her eyes kind. "We're coming you in Essem Dike, when du es zullest. We'll take care of you, if you let us." James nodded. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, gentle, reassuring, almost motherly. Anna and her bower stepped outside. The door closed with a wooden thud. Inside the shed, darkness settled around him, but thin cracks between the boards let in slivers of light. Narrow beams that cut through the shadows and reminded him he wasn't buried, wasn't forgotten, wasn't alone. Just waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. The sound of a padlock clicked into place. James sat in the dim shed, the rope still tied around his wrists and ankles. And yet, he felt better than he had the day before. Safer, warmer, not hunted. He didn't know what would become of him, but he knew he wasn't alone in the woods anymore. Outside, he heard her bower working, the scrape of harness leather, the low grunt of a mule being hitched. Hooves thudded softly in the dirt. Then the sounds faded as the farmer led the mule away. James drifted into sleep. He woke to the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood, slept again, woke to the metallic ring of a hammer striking something on the farm. He wasn't sure what was happening, only that life was going on around him. Then the padlock rattled. The door swung open, and sunlight spilled into the shed. Anna stepped inside and knelt beside him. Her hands were gentle as she untied his wrists, then his ankles. She didn't speak harshly. She didn't rush. She simply freed him and motioned for him to stand. They led him to the barn. Her bower stood waiting, a brush in one hand, the mule tied to a post beside him. He pointed at the animal and spoke in slow, deliberate German. "Weißt du, wie man Maltier pflegt? Do you know how to take care of mules?" He held up the brush and motioned toward the mule's flank. James understood instantly. His father had owned a mule. He'd brushed it 100 times. He stepped forward, took the brush from her bower's hand, and began brushing the mule in long, steady strokes. Her bower watched him, not smiling, not trusting, but seeing something new. This boy knew work. This boy wasn't helpless. This boy might belong here, at least for now. James brushed the mule in long, steady strokes. The animal flicked its ears, relaxed, and leaned into the brush. Her bower watched him for a moment, arms folded, expression unreadable. Finally, the farmer grunted. "Gut." "Good." He pointed to a wooden bucket near the stall. "Wasser." Water. James understood. He set the brush down, picked up the bucket, and carried it to the pump outside the barn. Her bower followed him, not close, but close enough to keep an eye on him. James filled the bucket, carried it back, and poured it into the trough. The mule dipped its head to drink. Her bower nodded again, just once. He pointed to a broom leaning against the wall. "Fijian. Sweep." James took the broom and began sweeping the barn floor. Dust rose in soft clouds. Sunlight streamed through the open doors. The work was simple, familiar, grounding. Anna appeared in the doorway with a small cup of water. She handed it to James with a gentle nod. He drank gratefully. Her bower watched all of this, the brushing, the water, the sweeping, the drinking, and something in his posture eased. Not trust, not yet, but acceptance of necessity. He needed the help, and this boy could work. When James finished sweeping, her bower pointed to the next task, a pitchfork, a pile of straw, a stall that needed fresh bedding. Short commands, simple gestures, no wasted words. James obeyed each one. And with every task completed, the farmer's caution softened by a fraction. Not enough to be safe, but enough to keep the story moving forward. Anna called him in from the barn. her voice carrying across the yard with firmness that meant the meal was ready. Herb Bauer wiped his hands on his trousers and gave James a short nod toward the house. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapped around them again. But before James could step toward the table, Anna stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. She pressed a folded stack of clothes into his chest. Soft fabric, clean, worn but cared for. Jacob's clothes. Anna didn't explain with words. She didn't need to. She simply said, in slow, careful German, "Sie Dawson, put these on." James looked down at the clothes, then back at her. Her expression was steady, kind, but also firm. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a necessity. He nodded. Anna motioned toward the table. It was time to eat. The table was already set when James stepped back into the kitchen, wearing Jacob's clothes. Nothing fancy. A loaf of dark rye bread sat in the center, dense and slightly cracked on top. Anna had sliced it thick, the way farm people did when bread had to last, but still fill a stomach. A small crock of butter, pale homemade, with a faint grassy smell, rested beside it. Steam rose from a pot on the stove. When Anna lifted the lid, the familiar scent of stew drifted to the room again. Potatoes, cabbage, onions, a hint of carrot, and just enough meat to flavor the broth. Wartime stew, stretched, simple, but warm and honest. She ladled portions into 3 bowls. Herb Bauer's bowl filled generously her own, modest but steady, and James's, somewhere in between. A plate of sliced apples sat off to the side. Not many, but enough to share. A small luxury in a year when sugar was scarce and fruit even scarcer. There was no dessert, no extra dishes, no coffee, only a pot of roasted grain, ersatz coffee, the bitter wartime substitute Germans drank when real beans were impossible to find. She poured a little into cups, the smell earthy and unfamiliar to James. They sat. Herb Bauer bowed his head again, murmuring a short prayer in German. The same cadence as before, steady and reverent. James didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Then they ate. The stew was hearty and hot, the bread thick and chewy, the apples crisp. Nothing extravagant. But to James, after days of fear and hunger, it tasted like a feast. Anna watched him quietly, making sure he had enough. Herb Bauer watched him too, not with suspicion now, but with the cautious eye of a man trying to decide what kind of boy had landed in his kitchen. James wasn't exactly sure what to think. Not yet, but something inside him was loosening. The tight, cold knot of fear that had lived in his chest since the crash. These people were rough, cautious, grieving, but they weren't cruel. They weren't soldiers. They weren't the enemy he'd been warned about. He was beginning to like them. More than that, he felt safe here. Safer than he had any right to feel. Better than death. Better than a prison camp. Better than running through the woods like a hunted animal. Sitting at their table, wearing Jacob's clothes, eating warm stew from a wooden bowl. It felt, in a strange and unexpected way, almost like home in America. Not the same, never the same, but close enough to make his throat tighten. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. They began to trust one another. Not all at once. Not with any grand moment. Just slowly. The way fences weather. The way seasons shift. The way grief softens when hands stay busy. James picked up bits of German, one word at a time. Herb Bauer learned a few English words in return, though he pretended not to care. Anna learned the most. She always did, repeating things gently until James understood. In those small exchanges, they traded more than language. James learned that their son Jacob had been killed in the war. The Bauers learned that James was the youngest of 7 children from a farm in Texas. They weren't quite sure where Texas was. Somewhere in America, somewhere impossibly far, but they nodded as if they could picture it. James proved himself quickly. He knew how to work. He knew mules, tools, soil, and sweat. Herb Bauer liked that, needed that, and James liked being useful, like being alive, like waking up to chores instead of fear. A pattern settled over the farm, steady, familiar, almost peaceful. One morning, James noticed something missing. The shotgun. It wasn't leaning by the door. It wasn't across Herb Bauer's lap. It wasn't anywhere in sight. And that, more than anything they had said or done, told James the truth. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was becoming part of their home. One morning during Frühstück, the three of them sat at the table as they always did now. Bread, a little butter, leftover stew warm from the night before. The kitchen was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after weeks of routine. Herr Bauer cleared his throat. He wasn't angry. He wasn't harsh. Just serious. He pointed at James, then tapped 2 fingers against his own throat. Stum, he said slowly. Mute. James blinked unsure. Herr Bauer tried again, this time adding gestures. Tapping his throat, shaking his head, holding up a hand for silence. When I bin 10 kommen, du bist stumm. If officials come, you are mute. He pointed toward the road, miming soldiers or inspectors arriving. Then he pressed a finger to his lips. Kein Stimme. Keen word. No voice. No word. Anna stepped in gently, repeating the idea with softer gestures, pointing to James, then making a quiet, no-sound motion with her hand. She added in slow, careful English, James, no talk. You cannot talk. Stum. James said, Stum, mute. Anna repeated, mute. Herr Bauer nodded firmly. Die Schaub nicked him here, he said. That's why you are not in the army. He tapped James's chest lightly. Stum. James understood now. If German officials came, soldiers, police, anyone, he wasn't American, wasn't a prisoner, wasn't a threat. He was simply a mute farmhand. He nodded. Herr Bauer watched him for a long moment, then gave a small grunt of approval and returned to his bread. Anna smiled at James, a quiet, reassuring smile that said you'll be safe if you stay close and stay quiet. And breakfast continued. The harvest came early that year, and with a kind of quiet urgency that settled over the Bauer farm like morning fog. Every able hand was needed, and Herr Bauer soon trusted James enough to give him real tools, the pitchfork, the axe, even the plow. The days fell into a rhythm. At dawn, the three of them walked out to the fields together, the wheat standing tall and golden, swaying in the late summer breeze. Herr Bauer showed James how to cut the stalks cleanly, how to bind them, how to stack them, so they would rot if the rains came early. James learned quickly. His hands blistered, then hardened. His back ached, then strengthened. Herr Bauer told Anna more than once that James was a good worker, and that he was glad to have him around. Anna would smile at that, a small, knowing smile, and set an extra portion of bread on the table for supper. The harvest took weeks. Long, hot days under a wide blue sky. Evenings spent hauling the wheat into the barn, threshing it, storing it in the great wooden bins. Much of it would be taken by the authorities for the war effort, but enough stayed behind to keep the farm alive through winter. James didn't love the idea that his labor helped feed the German army, but he accepted it. He wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it for the Bauers, the people who had fed him, sheltered him, and treated him like a son instead of an enemy. As the days passed, he began to feel something he hadn't felt since before the crash: belonging. He slept in Jacob's old room, wore Jacob's clothes, and worked Jacob's chores. Sometimes, when he caught a Bauer watching from across the field, he wondered if the old man saw his son's shadow in him. In the evenings, after supper, Anna would sit with him at the table and teach him German words. Some came easily. Others twisted his tongue so badly she would laugh and shake her head, wiping tears from her eyes. Herr Bauer pretended not to smile, but the corners of his mouth betrayed him. Still, they reminded him often, Stum Vergis nicked. Silent, don't forget. It wasn't unkind. It was survival. And James understood. With the harvest finally in, Herr Bauer set aside enough grain for next year's planting. The rest he measured out carefully, loading the bins until they were full. A few days later, a man from the government arrived with a ledger and a wagon, taking the portion owed for the war effort and leaving a small payment in return. It wasn't much, but it was something. Herr Bauer hitched a horse and went into town. When he returned, the wagon carried bolts of cloth, sturdy wool for himself, a soft patterned fabric for Anna, and, to James's surprise, a length of good cotton in a muted blue. Anna held it up against James's shoulder, squinting one eye as if measuring him by sight alone. Herr Bauer nodded once, as though the decision had already been made. They were planning new clothes for him, clothes that would actually fit. James didn't know what to say. He had expected to remain in Jacob's hand-me-downs forever, grateful just to have anything at all. But this felt different. It felt like acceptance. Like he wasn't just a farmhand or a refugee hiding in their spare room. He was becoming part of the household. The mailman came the same way he always did, riding his stubborn old mule, back straight, chin lifted, as if he were the most important man in the district. He was well into his 60s, but he carried himself with the pride of someone who believed deeply in his duty. Proud to be German, proud to be serving the fatherland, proud to be the one who always knew everyone's business, and suspicious of everyone. James was chopping wood in the yard when he heard the man's voice drift around the corner of the house, sharp, nasal, and already demanding answers. W.E.R. is the younger man. Who is this young man? James froze. The mailman's tone hardened. Warum ist nicht him here? Warum kämpft nicht für einen gerechten Krieg? Why isn't he in the army, fighting a righteous war? Herr Bauer answered before James could even think of moving. His voice was steady, but James could hear the tension beneath it. Ist verletzt, Bauer said. Einheld, aber kann nicht mehr sprechen. He is injured, a hero, but he can no longer speak. The mailman didn't sound convinced. His questions came faster, sharper, each one dripping with suspicion. James couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. The man was digging, prying, trying to find a crack in the story. Herr Bauer's patience snapped. His voice rose, louder than James had ever heard it. Du bist ein überreifer kleiner Mann, in einer erfundenen Uniform. You're an overzealous little man in a made-up uniform. The mule snorted. The mailman sputtered, offended, but Herr Bauer didn't back down. He stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward the gate. Mach den Arbeit einige weiter. Do your job and move along. For a moment, James thought the mailman might push back, but after a long, stiff silence, the old man clicked his tongue, tugged the reins, and rode off down the road, muttering to himself. Only when he was out of sight did Herr Bauer exhale, a long, weary breath. He glanced toward James, and for the first time, James saw something new in the farmer's eyes. Not just trust, protection. Herr Bauer came around the corner of the house and jerked his head toward the barn. No words, just a sharp motion that meant come now. James followed, wiping his hands on his trousers, trying to read the farmer's expression. It wasn't anger this time. It was something tighter. Worried. Inside the barn, Herr Bauer closed the door behind him and set the latch. He leaned the pitchfork against the wall, crossed his arms, and spoke in slow, deliberate German, the kind he used when he wanted James to understand even if he didn't know the words. Der Postbote, he said, tapping two fingers against his temple. Ein Schwatzer, ein Schnuffler. The mailman, a gossip, a snoop. James didn't need a translation. He nodded. Herr Bauer pointed toward the road, then mimed someone talking too much. His face twisted with irritation. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Stum, he said firmly. He tapped his own throat. Stum, immer, silent, always. James nodded again. Herr Bauer wasn't finished. He pointed at James's throat, then made a small cutting motion with his hand, not violent, just symbolic, a gesture that meant no voice, no sound, not a word. Then he mimed someone asking a question, a wagging finger, a tilted head, and pointed again at James's throat. James understood. If anyone asked him anything, he was to point to his throat, every time, no exceptions. Herr Bauer repeated it, slower. Stum. Tap to the throat. Stum. Tap again. James tapped his own throat in return. Herr Bauer let out a breath, not relief, but the weary acceptance of a man who knew how quickly one careless moment could destroy everything. He placed a hand briefly on James's shoulder, squeezed once, then stepped back. Gut, he said. Good. But his eyes said the rest. If the mailman talks, if anyone becomes suspicious, all of us are in danger. Early October brought the village's harvest celebration. Erntedankfest, the German Thanksgiving of the fields. Everyone in the valley was buzzing with preparations. Anna reminded James again and again that he must remain stum, silent. If he refused to participate at all, it would draw suspicion. But if he mingled quietly, stayed near the Bauers, and kept his head down, no one would question a hard-working farmhand who had lost his voice. This year, the Bauer home had been chosen to host a gathering, a decision made the previous autumn, long before war had taken their son. So Anna threw herself into the preparations with a kind of determined energy, sweeping, baking, polishing, and directing James and her Bauer like a general marshaling troops. Since the harvest was finished, James was free to help. He hauled tables, split firewood, hung lanterns, and carried baskets of apples and potatoes to the yard. His understanding of German had improved dramatically. He could follow most conversations now, even if he couldn't speak more than a few halting words. When he tried, his accent was unmistakable, the thick, rounded vowels of an American boy trying to wrap his tongue around German consonants. Anna teased him gently about it. Her Bauer grunted that it didn't matter, because he wasn't supposed to speak anyway. But James could feel it. He was no longer just hiding in their home. He was becoming part of their world. By late afternoon, the Bauer farm was alive with color and noise. Lanterns hung from the apple trees, swaying gently in the cool October breeze. We began inspecting troops. His eyes landed on James. They narrowed. He walked straight toward him. Her Bauer stiffened. Anna froze in the doorway, her hands still dusted with flour. The mailman stopped just a few feet from James, planting his hands on his hips. "Du," he said sharply. "Ich hab dich nach nie gesehen." "You, I've never seen you before." James kept his face calm. He pointed to his throat, just as her Bauer had taught him. The mailman's eyes flashed with suspicion. "Was this das?" he demanded. "Was stimmt nicht mit dir? Warum sprichst du nicht? What's this? What's wrong with you? Why don't you speak?" James pointed again to his throat. Then he shrugged. The mailman stepped closer, invading his space, studying him like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "Bist du nicht im hier?" he pressed. "Warum campst du nicht? Jeder junge man camped. Aren't you in the army? Why aren't you fighting? Every young man fights." James swallowed and pointed his throat a third time. The mailman snorted. "Convenient." Her Bauer stepped forward then, his voice sharp as a whip. "Er ist stumm," he said. "Seit einem Unfall. Ein guter Junge. Ein fleißiger Arbeiter." He is mute since an accident. A good boy, a hard worker. The mailman didn't look convinced. He circled James like a hawk, eyes scanning him from boots to hairline. "What Dorf?" he asked suddenly. "Woher kommst du? Which village? Where are you from?" James froze. He didn't know the name of a single German village. He pointed to his throat again, hoping it would be enough. It wasn't. The mailman leaned in until James could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Stumm heißt nicht dumm," he said coldly. "Mute doesn't mean stupid." Anna stepped between them, so quickly the mailman actually blinked. "Genug," she said firmly. "Enough." Her voice carried the authority of a woman who had raised children, run a farm, and buried a son. The mailman straightened, offended. "Ich frage nur," he muttered. "I'm only asking." "And we have answered," Anna replied. Her Bauer moved to James's side, a silent wall of protection. The mailman looked between them, the united front, the unspoken warning, and finally stepped back. He tugged his coat straight, sniffed, and walked toward the tables as if he had simply lost interest. But James saw it, the look over the shoulder, the lingering suspicion, the calculation. The mailman wasn't finished with him, not by a long shot. Anna touched James's arm gently. "Bleib bei UNS," she whispered. "Stay close to us." Her Bauer nodded once, his jaw tight. The music started again, but the warmth of the celebration felt thinner now, stretched over a thread of danger that could snap at any moment. And James understood something he hadn't fully grasped until now. He wasn't just hiding from soldiers. He was hiding from neighbors. As the music picked up again, the villagers formed another circle, clapping in rhythm. Someone tugged James into the ring, and he stumbled into place, laughing silently as he tried to follow the steps. He wasn't good at it, not even close, but the others didn't seem to mind. They laughed with him, not at him, and for a moment he felt almost invisible in the best possible way. Then he noticed her, a young woman, 18, maybe 19, with dark braids pinned neatly behind her head and a ribbon tied at her wrist. She stood across the circle, smiling shyly at him. When the dance shifted partners, She stepped closer, her eyes bright with curiosity. James felt heat rise to his face. He nodded politely, careful not to open his mouth. The circle tightened, and soon she was dancing beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. She moved with easy confidence, her skirt swaying with each step. Every so often she glanced at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. James smiled back, hoping it looked natural. When the dance ended, she lingered for a moment, as if expecting him to say something. Anything. But he only dipped his head in a polite half-bow and stepped back, pointing lightly to his throat. Her smile faded into a puzzled expression, then softened with sympathy. She nodded once and returned to her friends. James exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Later, as the lanterns flickered and the tables filled with food, Anna came to stand beside him. She watched the young woman laughing with a group of friends near the cider barrels. "She likes you," Anna said quietly. James blinked, unsure if he'd understood her German correctly. Anna nodded toward the girl. "Das Mädchen, sie hat Augen für dich." The girl, "She has eyes for you." James felt his face warm again. Anna's expression changed, not unkind, but serious. "She is the mailman's Enkelin," she said, "his granddaughter." James's stomach dropped. Anna touched his arm gently, her voice low. "Blieb vorsichtig, Junge." "Be careful, boy." Across the yard, the girl looked his way again, and beside her, the mailman watched him too, not with curiosity, with suspicion. That evening, after all the guests had gone and the laughter had faded from the yard, James stayed outside to help clean up. He gathered plates, stacked chairs, and swept the last of the dust from the stones. The air was cool, the sky dimming, and the farm felt peaceful again. Anna stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She thought they were alone. "James," she said softly, "did you enjoy yourself?" He didn't answer with words. He never did when others might be near. Instead, he lifted his hands and made a few simple gestures, the kind a mute man might use. Then, with only the slightest movement of his chin, he indicated the tree line at the edge of the yard. Anna followed his eyes. There, half hidden among the trunks, stood the mailman, still as a post, watching the farm with a look that wasn't curiosity so much as suspicion. He must have lingered after the celebration, or doubled back to see what the Bowers were doing when alone. Anna's breath caught. She looked back at James. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even change expression, but his eyes told her everything. "We are not alone. Be 14. Anna nodded once, small, controlled, the way a woman does when she understands danger but refuses to show fear. "James," she said quietly, calm rain. "Come inside." He followed her into the house without looking back. Inside, her Bauer was wiping down the table. Anna closed the door firmly behind her and spoke in a low voice. "Wurde," she said. "Der Postbote, im Wald. Hat sie gelesen." He was there, the mailman, in the forest, watching. Her Bauer didn't look surprised. He didn't even pause his work. He just grunted and said, with the weary certainty of a man who has lived his whole life in a small village, "Das ist sein Art. That's the way that man is." Her Bauer set the cloth down, straightened his back, and added with a tired snort, Denkt, Erster Dorfwater, aber ist nur neugierig." He thinks he is a village watcher, but he's just nosy. Anna glanced toward James, the mute American who had to act German, who wasn't mute at all, and her expression softened with both worry and resolve. She didn't need to say anything. James understood the danger. Anna understood the risk. And her Bauer understood the kind of man who lurked in the trees, pretending to be important. The three of them stood in the quiet kitchen, the lantern light flickering across their faces, each of them knowing the same truth. The mailman wasn't dangerous because he was powerful. He was dangerous because he was nosy. And nosy men in wartime villages could ruin lives without meaning to. Her Bauer met her eyes. "We stay careful," he said. "As always." James stood quietly by the door listening, understanding more than they realized. The celebration was over. The music was gone. The neighbors had left. But the danger, the quiet, creeping kind, was still very much alive. The next morning began like any other. James had already milked a cow, mucked the stall, hauled water, and swept the barn aisle before the sun had fully cleared the treetops. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, Anna was setting out breakfast, and her bower was washing his hands at the basin. They ate together in the quiet rhythm they'd grown used to: bread, a little butter, leftover stew warmed from the night before. Afterward, as always, came James's German lesson. Anna pointed to the window and said slowly, "Weihnachten." James repeated it with his American accent. "Weihnachten." She smiled. Better. He tried to form a sentence about Christmas. Something simple, something he practiced, when a sharp knock rattled the front door. James froze. Anna's eyes flicked to him. Her bower stood, wiping his hands on his trousers, and went to answer it. When he opened the door, a young woman stood on the step, Gertrude, the mailman's granddaughter. Her hair was braided neatly, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression troubled. Gertrude, her bower said in German, surprised. Was Brink Dyke so for hirer? What brings you here this early morning? She swallowed, then answered in careful German. Ich schu dir Indiana einen Entschuldigung, UND Urim Gas. I owe you and Anna an apology and your guess. Her bower stepped back and motioned with his whole body. Calm rain. Come in. As she entered, and a call from the kitchen, Gertrude? Then she turned to James and gave him a long, meaningful stare, the kind that said stay mute, stay still, stay safe. James nodded once. He folded his hands in his lap, lowered his eyes, and slipped back into the role he had learned so well. The quiet, harmless, mute farmhand. Gertrude stepped inside and immediately saw James sitting at the table. She hesitated, then asked in German, "Darf ich?" "May I?" Her bower nodded. She approached the table slowly. "Ich kenn deinen Namen nicht, aber ich schu dir eine Entschuldigung." I never heard your name, but I owe you an apology. James looked at her with a blank, neutral expression, the perfect mute farmhand. Inside, though, he felt a small flicker of humor. Maybe I'll go to Hollywood when I get home. He thought, if I can act this well. Gertrude glanced toward Anna, unsure. Anna stepped in smoothly. "Manchmal kann von den Lippen lesen," she said. "Manchmal nicht. Sometimes he can watch your mouth and understand. Sometimes no." Then she waved her hands to get James's attention, exaggerating the motions the way she always did when others were watching. "Gertrude wants your name," she said slowly. "May I tell her?" James gave a tiny smile and shook his head. "Not no, but go ahead." Anna turned back to the girl. "Same name is James. We in der Bibel. His name is James, like in the Bible." Gertrude shrugged lightly. Grossvater sagged. Sollt in der Armee sein. Sagged. Alle jungen Männer sollten in der Armee sein, auch wenn nix sprechen kann. Ich denke, sich. My grandfather says he should be in the army. He says all young men should be in the army, even if he can't speak. I think he is wrong. I do too, Anna said firmly. Gertrude nodded, then added, Grossvater sagt, ist nicht von hier. Grandfather says he is not from here. Anna didn't flinch. Ja, dein Grossvater hat recht. Kam aus dem Süden. Yes, your grandfather is correct. He came here from the South. Gertrude frowned, confused. The South could mean many things, but she didn't press. She looked at James again, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. He kept his expression soft, harmless, silent, exactly what he needed to be. After Gertrude left, her Bauer closed the door with a grunt. Dies Gans family is neugierig, he muttered. That whole family is nosy. Anna nodded, and that was the end of it. There was work to do, and on a farm, work never waited for gossip. They went back to their chores. The next year came and went in its slow, steady rhythm. There were moments that made their hearts pound. A patrol passing too close, a neighbor asking too many questions, the mailman lingering at the gate longer than necessary. But nothing ever broke the fragile safety they had built. And as the months rolled by, the village grew used to James. To some, he was a mute boy. To others, the dummy, not cruelly, just the way rural people labeled things they didn't understand. But he worked hard, smiled often, and never caused trouble. People stopped wondering where he came from, stopped asking why he didn't speak, stopped caring. He simply became part of the landscape. Germany, however, was changing. Money inflated so fast it felt like a joke. A loaf of bread cost more in the evening than it had that morning. Families struggled. Shops closed. Arguments broke out in the village square. But the Bauers were farmers. They grew what they ate. They traded what they could. They survived. James was grateful every day for that. He knew that if he crashed near a city or a factory town or a place where food had to be bought instead of grown, he might not have lived to see the next season. But here, on this farm, he had a place, a purpose, a family. Then, one cold morning, everything changed. A rider came down the road shouting the news before he even reached the village. Waffenstillstand. Ein Waffenstillstand. Armistice, an armistice, the war, the endless, grinding war was over. Anna dropped her basket. Herr Bauer stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers, staring as if he didn't quite believe it. James felt something rise in his chest. Relief, fear, hope, all tangled together. The world had shifted. And whatever came next, their quiet secret would not stay quiet forever. The news of the armistice spread through the village like a warm wind. People cried, laughed, prayed, argued. No one knew what came next, but everyone knew the killing was over. That afternoon, Anna found James in the barn, brushing down the mule. She stood quietly for a moment, hands folded in front of her, as if gathering courage. Then she said softly, "James, du kannst jetzt nach Hause gehen." "You can go home now." He turned toward her. "We will miss you," she added, her voice trembling. Before he could react, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Tight, fierce, motherly. He froze for a heartbeat, then returned the embrace, feeling her shoulders shake with a single quiet sob. When she finally let go, Herr Bauer was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look stern but failing. "You must stay mute while you are here," he warned. "If you speak, even now, you could cause us big trouble." James nodded. "We will tell the neighbors you went back to the south." Herr Bauer continued. "They will believe it." James nodded again. The Bauers had already done more for him than he could ever repay. If staying silent a few more days kept him safe, he would do it gladly. They worked out a plan over the kitchen table, speaking in low voices even though the war was over. James would wear his American uniform beneath his farmer's clothes. Before the train crossed into France, he would slip between the cars, remove the German clothing, and drop it onto the tracks. Once in France, he would speak only English and tell the truth. He had hidden in Germany to survive, because that was exactly what he had done. Monday morning, 6 o'clock sharp, the train pulled away from the station with a long, tired groan. James sat alone on a wooden bench. No suitcase, no bag, nothing but the American uniform hidden under rough farm clothes. The train was slow, lumbering, stopping at every small village. The conductor checked his ticket, nodded, and moved on. So far, so good. James kept his head down, hands folded, heart steady. He watched the countryside roll by. Fields, forests, small towns still waking from the long nightmare war. Then he saw it. A sign. The first French city ahead. His pulse quickened. He stood, walked calmly to the narrow space between the train cars, and closed the door behind him. The wind whipped at his clothes. The metal rattled beneath his feet. He worked quickly. He unbuttoned the farmer's shirt, pulled off the trousers, and dropped them beneath the train. They vanished instantly under the wheels, swallowed by the tracks. Now he stood in his American flyer's uniform, patched, worn, but unmistakably his. He took a breath, opened the door to the next car, and stepped inside. People stared. A few gasped softly. An American airman, alone, appearing out of nowhere on a train leaving Germany. It was a sight no one expected, but no one said a word. James walked down the aisle, calm, steady, every step carrying him closer to home. As the train crossed the border into France, the French conductor made his way down the aisle. When he reached James, he switched to English. "Were you in the German car?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "I didn't know the difference." The conductor looked him over from head to toe, The American uniform, the tired eyes, the empty hands. Then shook his head and muttered under his breath, just like an American in the German car. People nearby turned to look. Eyes widened. Mouths fell open. An older Frenchman suddenly stood up, speaking quickly in French. Venez asseyez-vous ici. Here, sit here. Take my seat. He turned to the others and said with pride swelling in his voice, Un hero's Americain. An American hero. James felt a twist of guilt in his stomach. He hadn't fought a glorious battle. He had survived by hiding, but he sat down anyway. The man insisted, and the whole car seemed to lean toward him with gratitude. For the first time in over a year, James felt the weight of being seen not as a threat, but as someone who mattered. When the train finally rolled into Paris, the platform was alive with noise, soldiers, civilians, carts, shouting, laughter, the sound of a city waking from war. James stepped down and asked the nearest person, Where can I find the American embassy? Another American soldier, hearing a familiar accent, spun around and grabbed James by the shoulder. Airman? You're an American airman? Wow, you guys saved our rears. James didn't know what to say. He hadn't saved anyone. He had barely saved himself. But he nodded, and the soldier clapped him on the back like they'd known each other for years. For the first time since the crash, James was surrounded by his own people, his own language, his own uniform, his own world. He was almost home.
Eventually, James rolled into Canton, Texas. The train hadn't even stopped rocking when he climbed down, and before his boots touched the ground, his father had him in a crushing hug, squeezing the air out of his lungs. Then came his mother, then his brothers, then his sisters. Everyone crying, talking at once, touching his shoulders, his face, his uniform, as if making sure he was real. We were told you were killed on your first mission, someone said through tears. James shook his head. I was shot down, but I hid. I ran. Then I was taken in by a German couple. Their son, my age, was killed in France.
His voice softened.
I love those people. There was a celebration that night at his father's home. Food, music, neighbors, laughter. But James felt a quiet sadness beneath it all. He knew what the Bauers would be facing now. Germany was broken. Food was scarce. And he had left them behind. The next morning, his mother introduced him to a girl who looked surprisingly like Gertrude. Beautiful, soft smile, sad eyes. Her name was Jenna. They went to church together. Met again at the pharmacy. Walked the dusty roads of Canton talking about nothing and everything. Eventually, they were formally engaged. By the next year, James had bought 10 acres, built a 2-room house with his own hands, and married Jenna. Once, while they were dating, he accidentally called her Gertrude. What? She asked, puzzled. He smiled and shook his head. Just joking. She let it go. The year after they married, they harvested their first cotton crop and welcomed a baby boy. James named him Jacob, for the German boy who died in France and never came home. Brief AUS Texas, MIT photo beglegt. Letter from Texas, with photo enclosed. Frühling 1925 Canton, Texas, Berenightsdaten. He wrote his letter in German, translation in English will follow. Liebe Huyende Frau Bauer. Ich hoffe, dass es Ihnen gut geht. Ich denke oft an Sie, jeden Tag. Ich schreibe, weil ich Ihnen etwas sagen möchte. In diesem Brief ist ein Foto von meiner Familie, mein Frau Jenna und unsere 4 Kinder, Jacob, Anna, James Jr. und Klein Ruth. Ich möchte, dass Sie ihr Gesichter sehen. Ein Teil von Ihnen leden Ihnen. Ich möchte Ihnen auch etwas sagen, das in meinem Herzen ist. Ich liebe Jenna mit ganzem Herzen, so wie Herr Bauer sein Anna liebt. Ich hab gelernt, wie man liebt, als ich in ihrem Haus war. Ich hab gelernt, wie ein Mann seine Frau behandeln soll. Ich hab gelernt, wie ein Zuhaus aussieht. Sie haben mir das beigebracht. Ich hab meinen ersten Sohn Jacob genannt, zu Ehren ihres Sohns. Ich hoffe, dass es Ihnen Trost bringt. Ich denke Ihnen für mein Leben, für Ihr Gut, für Ihr Vertrauen. Ich werde Sie nie vergessen. Mit Liebe und großem Respekt, James. English translation. Dear Herr and Frau Bauer, I hope this letter finds you well. I think of you often, every day, in truth. I am writing because I want to show you something. Enclosed is a photograph of my family, my wife Jenna, and our 4 children, Jacob, Anna, James Jr., and little Ruth. I want you to see their faces. A part of you lives in them. I also want to tell you something that has been on my heart. I am fully in love with Jenna, as deeply as a Bauer is with Anna. I learned how to love while living in your home. I learned how a man should treat his wife. I learned what a home is supposed to be. You taught me those things. I named my first son Jacob, in honor of your boy. I hope that brings you comfort. Thank you for my life, for your kindness, for your trust. I will never forget you. With love and great respect, James. James once lived in East Texas, and the Bauers lived in Germany, 2 worlds apart. But for a little less than 2 years, their stories crossed and changed each other forever. James crossed an ocean and a war to find home again. And it makes me wonder about your home. I'd love to know what part of the world you're listening from. Share in the comments. It helps me feel connected to you. And one more question, because this story asks it quietly. If you were in the Bauer's place, would you take in a young, helpless stranger?